Hi, I'm Jerry Portwood, the founder of the Queer Love Project. This is our third episode of the Queer Love podcast, and I'm going to do something a little different. Previously, I've chatted with the authors of essays that we've published, but for this episode, I invited Xandra McMahon, creator of How We Met, a Queer Love Archive, to discuss the first season of her podcast. Plus, she also took part in our QLB questionnaire, which I've been told is very difficult, so we'll talk about that and what it was like and go deeper into some of the answers. To start out, just let me introduce Xandra as a journalist. She's a podcast producer and, of course, the creator of the How We Met, a Queer Love Archive. As she explained, she fell in love with audio storytelling in college and was lucky enough to turn it into a career. She's worked in the public radio world, spent years making hyperlocal daily news podcasts, and nowadays produces podcasts for higher education institutions. How We Met, a Queer Love Archive, launched in January and shares the real-life love stories of queer couples. I had the privilege of being on the final episode of the first season with my husband, and I wanted to chat with Xandra about the project since, so many of our goals align in so many distinct ways. So thanks for joining me, Xandra.
Thank you so much for having me, Jerry.
So I'm going to ask you the question you probably hate getting the most first, so we get it out of the way. But you don't meet many people that have X's in their name. So tell me a little bit about the backstory.
Yes. Okay. So I am technically kind of named after my grandma on my mom's side, who was named Xandra. But then also the year that I was born, Alexandra was very popular. So I think my parents had both of those things in mind. And then according to legend, my older brother was in a kindergarten class with a little girl named Xandra. And my mom heard that and just fell in love with the name and was like, that's it. So that's how I got the name. But a lot of people say Xandra, and it doesn't bother me when people say Xandra because I think about the Xavier debate. It's some people say Xavier, some people say Xavier. Either way is fine.
I've been criticized on that point as well. That's why I always want to clarify and make sure I'm doing it right. Well, I know you're not always used to being on the other side of the interview. So let me just start, when you started the podcast, you said you had two goals in mind, that you wanted to amplify queer joy and serve as a historical record for queer people's experiences across generations through the lens of love. Well, tell me, it's been 6 months almost. What's it been like talking to all these people about their intimate, deep secrets and love stories?
I feel very privileged because I feel like I've been learning a lot from each episode and each couple. And I feel so grateful to people who are willing to open up like you and your husband did, for example, and get really vulnerable with me and let me pry into some of their more intimate moments. But I always walk away from those conversations just buzzing with energy and just feeling like this renewed sense of belief in love. And, sometimes I think I was joking with one couple that it kind of feels almost like couples therapy for me too. I feel because I'm just listening to all these couples who have sometimes been together for, decades. And so there's so much wisdom there that I feel like I'm eating up and then thinking about it in terms of my relationship and how can I apply it to my life. It feels like this great community that we've kind of started to build through the podcast.
I love that you mentioned the couples therapy side of that because I definitely have told people, well, at first I told my therapist I was doing it and I'd been trying to get my husband into couples therapy just for the fun of it. And this was a little bit of a bite size, especially at the end. You actually ask your participants to share something that they haven't shared with the other person. Whereas we kind of went over the questions that we were going to be answering, but there was this last bit. And that moment especially, it's always been hard for me to get my partner to share certain things because he's not really into introspection. And so it did feel like that. And I think that ending, well, as I even told you at the time, you got us to go somewhere that we hadn't gone, even though we've been together for over 20 years. So I think that was really special. This is going to sound really heavy and deep, but, I actually don't believe in unconditional love. I think there are always conditions. Even with parents and biological family. But I think, Patricia, you have taught me, I know I've disappointed you at times and probably you've disappointed me, but I've never seen you waver. I've always known that I've had a safety net, and that's why I can take all the risks that I can take.
I would disagree with you. Actually, I do believe in unconditional love. I think once you make a commitment, you make a full commitment no matter what, end of story.
See? So I'm wrong once again?
Yes, so you're wrong. I can only speak to myself, and I can only offer it from my perspective. Whatever Jerry wants to do, that's his prerogative. I cannot control him. This is my commitment. Of course, I want him to have the same level of commitment to me, but if he doesn't, he doesn't. But this is what I've chosen to do. It's not an imposition on him. I've made this choice for myself to share it with another person. And I believe, I truly believe that that's why we actually have been, able to be together for so long and going through, some serious difficulties, is because we have made that kind of openness, or I don't know what it's exitoso, that made that kind of commitment. But also, I guess it's not only the commitment of the couple, but it's also the commitment with oneself. It's the whole question of sacrifice, right? Of sacrificing yourself, of making this sacred.
So I'm actually recording this in my bedroom, which I know our podcast producer Daniel would love it if I was in studio with him or had a different kind of setup. And I know you are often recording these sessions with people from their homes remotely. What do you think is the difference where you're recording it or where the people are, how comfortable they are? Like, what does that matter when you're doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I have like two kind of brains going on at the same time. One brain is like my audio producer brain, which is just like I want to get them in the best sounding room possible, so that like I'm really a stickler with trying to get the highest quality audio possible, just because I think it's a better listening experience. But then the other side of my brain is like I want, because of the kinds of conversations we're having in this show, like and getting very intimate, I would love for the couple to feel as comfortable as possible. So wherever that safe space is for them in their home, like that's ideal. And I've also really felt like it's very important to have them in the same space. So like I wouldn't want a couple joining a Riverside call or a virtual, call from two different computers in different rooms, because then I just feel like that completely takes the intimacy out of it, because I'm really just there as like a fly on the wall. Like I'm not filling the kind of traditional interviewer's role where like you hear me, like I'm part of the conversation, but I try to view myself as more of a guide and let the couple kind of take it where they want to go. So having them in the same room has been really important.
Tell me a little bit. I mean, you have this history with audio storytelling, which has actually a long history if we go back decades. But in the last few years, especially in the last couple decades, podcasting has become such a big thing. How does it work as journalism? And how did you, get the idea of like, I'm going to interview couples? And were there any like mental roadblocks that you had to get over?
I fell in love with radio and podcasting in college because I majored in broadcast production. I knew I didn't really want to do TV, but I knew I wanted to do something beyond print, and kind of fell into podcasting through, the college newspaper, like online news outlet. And I think what I love about it is it kind of is this theater of the mind where, you can show so much through audio, and like it increases your capabilities, but still allowing the audience member to fill in the gaps. If you think about like when we're reading a beautiful essay or prose or something, there's a lot of world building that happens within the mind. And I think that happens too with audio. So, and I think also like the human voice is just a very intimate medium in itself. I've always really liked being able to listen to someone tell their story in their own words and their own voice. So when applying that to couples' love stories, it just felt like the perfect format for that, because, hearing a couple get to say in their own words. And I think, we've seen other types of media like this. Like I always think about the Modern Love podcast where, they took that column and it was a very successful column, and then they expanded upon it with a podcast. But it's usually, at least in its early days, it was celebrities reading the columns. And I always thought that was entertaining, but then I just thought, well, wouldn't it be more powerful if we heard directly from the people, and getting that kind of characterization. So I think all of that was kind of happening in the back of my head when I was thinking about doing this with couples.
Yeah, the Modern Lab podcast has actually gone through an evolution. I have a friend who's a producer on it. I know now they're doing it differently as well. They're not just narrating. And I also love that you bring it up, because one of the ways that I explain the Queer Love Project to people is I got 3 essays rejected. My co-editor has had several essays rejected. And so I'm also like, if you've had a queer love story rejected from Modern Love, send it to me, because we need to tell more of these stories. And that's partly what you're trying to do too, is like, we have so many of these, opposite gendered or, more heterosexual relationship stories where we have millennia of them, and we don't have as many of the same gender or same sex or queer stories. So tell me about your selection process, like how you found the subjects and how you've selected them.
Ooh, yeah, it's been very kind of grassroots effort, because I was just, starting with my network and my circle, and then having it kind of branch out from there, because it's also like, I remember having this idea, like when the idea really started to kind of percolate over a year ago, and I was like, okay, I have no idea if this is even gonna work, if this would be weird, because I wanted to sit down and have a couple tell their whole love story, but then I knew I also wanted to edit myself out of it, and so that was gonna take a lot of trial and error with the couples of like, how do I get them to tell the story in a way that you can edit out the interviewer later? So I started with close friends of mine, because I was just like, let's just see how this goes, and I knew that they would be willing to kind of make the sausage with me.
What I really remember is the Halloween party at Rob Brown's house. And at the Halloween party, I was dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo. And I walked in and I was just feeling really anxious to be there. And I like scanned the crowd, and Kate was sitting over in a corner, like perfectly lit by a lamp, in a big comfy chair. And she's just lounging back in a muscle tank and these big foam biceps on her arms. And she started giggling right when I walked. We like locked eye contact and she started giggling. And I walked over there and she invited me to sit down on the chair with her. So I got like in the chair with her and she was just cracking jokes the whole entire time. And finally excused myself to go to the bathroom. And I just looked at myself in the mirror and literally like grabbed the sides of the sink. And I was like, fuck. Because I was in love, man. That's when I knew I was in love with Kate. And I was dating somebody else who I was actually wearing a couple's costume with at that party. But the heart wants what it wants.
Honestly, like when you walked into the party, like I felt there was no one else in the room for like the moments when we locked eyes and you walked over, and like everything felt like electric. I had a big crush on Velma too, so when you came in as Velma, it was like, whoa.
And we became good friends after that. We became part of like a similar crew of people.
So
that
the
would hang out.
stoners.
Yeah, the stoners, the stoner crowd. But I thought she'd never love me.
Well, Emily, at the time we were hanging out, Emily was in a relationship. I wasn't going to overtly be like, I like you, because you were obviously like entwined. Like we were all friends. Like it was hard to be like, well, I like you, so dump,
Right. You're very respectful. And I think the reason that I thought that Kate would never love me, there was that. And also like, I thought we could never be together, because in my limited worldview, being 17 or 18, all I know is high school and my friend group. And I thought that it would be some earth-shattering scandal if I broke up with my girlfriend and then dated somebody that we were friends with. Yeah, I don't think I had figured out that I had agency over my life yet.
And it came out really well. And that actually ended up being episode 3 with Emily and Kate. They're very good friends of mine that live here in Philly. So I was like, okay, this is clearly something and I want to do more of it. So then, I reached out to people and asked if you know any queer couples who would be down to do, this very vulnerable thing with me, please put them in touch with me. And I did. I got connected to so many great people all across the country. You know, we've had couples from Berkeley, California, Colorado, over here on the East Coast in New York with you, Jerry, and Patricio, and there's another couple in the season from New York. So, and I have a lot of couples now that are slated for season 2, because I started to, as the season went on, I knew I only wanted to start small with just like 6 episodes, but then the couples just kind of kept rolling in as people were getting excited about it and being like, oh, you have to talk to this person. Oh, you should talk to these people. So now I have a lot of stories that I'm excited to tell.
So you mentioned the vulnerable thing and also relying on the generosity of friends. I had to do the same when I started this, because I was like, are people going to be able to handle, well, first of all, you know, as a journalist and as a memoir writer, like, I think I'm used to excavating my soul and sharing it with strangers, but a lot of people I realize are not so used to that, and they get really skittish. So thank you also for taking the questionnaire, which people have told me can be very intimidating. So tell me a little bit about why you felt that when you looked at the questions.
Yeah, I was really surprised that it was harder than I thought it would be, because you sent me the questions and I glanced at it and I was like, oh yeah, this will be fun to fill out. I'll just sit down one night and knock it out. And then as I was sitting down and actually doing it, I was like, oh, this is here we go again, here where I'm having trouble answering questions about me. Okay, I think part of it, Jerry, is that I tend to be a more private person. I'm very comfortable being on the other side of the mic, as we've talked about. So I think when it comes to answering personal questions and kind of having to go back and do this inventory of my experiences, it can be a little jarring and scary, but I felt like it was only fair for me to do that, since I, like you said, asked so many couples to bare their souls to me on mic. So
well, one of the things that I've been fascinated to learn is how important the L word has been to so many young queer people, especially lesbian identified or female identified people. And yet I've never really watched more than a couple episodes. And you said you spent an entire summer binging it, and that was a very pivotal moment. And you're not alone. Like, so many people have shared that. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I know. Because I read the questionnaires all the time too. And I was also noticing that theme of like, wow, a lot of people also were with me when it comes to the L word. But I think it's hard to find another show that was so big and so long lasting as the L word when it came to that kind of group that you're talking about, of like lesbian identified or female identified, just sapphic culture. And I mean, it was a phenomenon. And I think that, you know, over the years, as we've looked back on it through a more queer lens, I guess you could say, I think that there's a lot of flaws with the L word, especially with in regards to how the show treats trans characters and how like other characters within the show treat the trans characters. So it's by no means perfect, but I think at least we had something. You know, we were all so starved for content, and I think it was the big moment where lesbians could be like, this is a show that really wants to explore what it means to be a lesbian in today's age. So I think for that reason, I glommed onto it. And it's just so soapy and chaotic and fun. Like, what a good summer watch. If you ever just like have a lot of time in the summer, Jerry, like that's such a good time to watch it.
I really think that I'm going to try and I'm going to dive in. I know that things have changed though, now that it's not the original version, like with Queer as Folk as well. They didn't have all the licensing for all the music, so I think some of the soundtrack has changed. I interviewed the cast of the American Queer as Folk about that, and they were disappointed. But I definitely will go into it. I think it's time that I finally pop my L word cherry, if I can say that.
Yes.
And I know the fandom is real, because I actually had the fun time of walking in World Pride in New York in 2019, and Todrick Hall's float was in front of me, and I was with the CBS crew, and so the L Word cast from the new L Word was with me with some of the famous people, and just the different cheers and fandom from in front and behind were intense, and it was like this very amazing moving experience.
That's so cool.
Of course, then everything shut down. So the 2020 Pride, I had a very different experience because it was more of a protest, and we were, finally coming out of our fear of being with other people, and that one was a totally different kind of experience. But anyway, I digress. You also mentioned that Harry Met Sally, that iconic rom-com from the 80s, was influential in how you do your own podcast. It's a movie I haven't watched in forever, and I feel like I need to go back and revisit it as well. Tell me why it resonates for you.
I feel like When Harry Met Sally is one of those rom-coms that a lot of people point to as being like the quintessential, like, it shaped so many rom-coms that came after it. I don't want to call it like the original rom-com because it's not, but I do think that it was so influential in so many movies that came after it. So for that alone, I think we have to like appreciate it and respect it. But it's also just a movie that I always grew up watching and loving. And I think specifically, I had revisited it with my girlfriend around like maybe a few months before this idea started to take off in my head, because she had never seen it. And so we sat down and watched it together, and she loved it, because I think there's also something so beautiful about having two people be friends for so long and then having that blossom into love. Because I think that also kind of aligns with my beliefs and definitions around love, of like, it is something that you have to water and grow over time. So for that, I love the movie. But then what I've always found so charming is those intercut scenes of the older couples on the couch sharing like quick little bits about how they met. They're super short scenes, but I just think that they stick in your brain, because, and very similar to how I've tried to structure How We Met, in terms of, you don't hear an interviewer asking them questions. It's just two people on a couch saying this is how they met. Like one story I feel like is, talking about how they were born in the same hospital on the same day or something like that. And so I wanted to try and replicate a little bit of that energy with How We Met, and but make it queer.
You have definitely done a good job of that. And I think part of it is your sensitivity to what you just said about the idea of queer love. And the question I think people have the hardest time, and it's why I ask everyone to tackle it, because I know they'd want to skip it, is how do you define love? And you had a really great response. And you mentioned that love is a choice you make. And you also mentioned bell hooks. So tell me a little bit about your feelings around about that.
Yes. Yeah, I have to give credit where credit is due. And bell hooks is all about love. I read it a couple years ago for the first time, and it really kind of rocked my world in terms of like how to have relationships with people, not just romantic relationships, but just like all relationships. And then also, is very helpful in reflecting on any childhood trauma, or just kind of recontextualizing like how I've been shown love in the past. So all of that stuff, I think, has started to help my definition and how I view love evolve. And I do think in terms of love being a choice, and I've seen other people talk about this too. And I think actually my first couple, Alex and Danica, in the first episode, Danica makes this point at the very end of both of them believing that love is an action. It's a verb. It's not just this thing that we're striving for, this great idea. It's something that you should choose to do every day. And I really love that. And I tried to implement that in my own life and how I show up for people and how I show up in my relationship, of never letting the work be done. Because I think that's another key part of love, is like always putting in the work to have trust in your loved one, and show them that you love them, instead of just telling them. I don't know. Maybe these are all basic things, but I think sometimes it's good to go back to the basics and just really keep in mind of like, that's how you can leave the biggest impact.
No, I actually think it's really important. I mean, obviously, bell hooks has that quote, love is a verb, and in school we're all taught love is a noun. And so it's like this idea. But I think, I actually, as a kid, I remember really struggling with the word, because I was like, it needed to be so profound. And some people would just toss off like, I love you. And I kind of, as a weird, nerdy, sensitive kid, was like,
Oh.
I'm not going to say it unless I have this, profound feeling, or if I, maybe it's the Southern Baptist in me that I had to have this calling, and it needed to be something that I felt so deeply. And so for a long time, I wouldn't even use the word, even with my friends, because I felt like it needed to be reserved for this sort of like holy moment. And, and even doing this, like, I think the reason why I struggled was when I was at Out magazine, we had our love issue, and most of my peers thought it was really corny that we were doing a love issue. And I thought it was such a political act, right? That love between queer people is still considered something that isn't allowed or not possible. I mean, I've been told to my face, like, what you do and what you have is not love. And I've had to struggle with that. So even just doing this, I had to be like, you know what? Maybe I'm not a sentimental, saccharine love person, but I still feel very deeply about this. And I think that's what you're doing with yours as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you made that point about some people maybe being a little too dismissive of love as just like this corny thing of like, oh, yeah, let's get down to the real issues. But like, I don't want to gloss over like how powerful love is, and like how it, like, to your point, it can be this really strong political force sometimes if you want to, or I feel like it is the agent of change that is constant in our world is love, like more than anything else. So yeah, I hope people don't underestimate it.
So one of the responses that you had in the questionnaire that I really loved is you talked about growing up in conservative Colorado and that you had this job at JCPenney. And the mall was such a melting pot for so many people. It isn't as much anymore, maybe because, we've shifted away from that sort of retail experience. But I had a job in the mall, and it sounds like it was important to you. But it was also where you met older queer people for the first time. But I just love that you mentioned JCPenney and that was important.
I know. I loved my high school job at JCPenney. Like, that was like my second family, was all my coworkers over there. And like, I did have like all these work moms. Not all of them were queer, but I did have a slew of work moms through JCPenney that I just felt like I could talk to about anything. And yeah, I felt like that was like a rare, special thing that I got to experience. Especially, yeah, given the environment that I was growing up in, that was heavily evangelical and conservative, and it was just kind of a breath of fresh air to like actually. I think it was funny too, because when I first found out that some of my coworkers were queer, I think my little 16-year-old sheltered brain was just like, like a little bit gasped, like clutch my pearls. But then the more I got to know them, and like, I was like, oh, these people are really cool, and this is not something that needs to be scary. And so it's funny looking back on that, because now, everybody in my life, sometimes I'll meet a straight person and I'll gasp, clutch my pearls. Just kidding. But it's just that things have changed so much now.
Well, not to burst your bubble, also, the JCPenney was also known, at least in my small town in South Georgia, as the cruisy bathroom place. People would either go to the Sears bathroom or the JCPenney bathroom. Men, these are men, but they would like go there to hook up. So that was also a thing.
I love that JCPenney has been this, whether it wants to or not, the safe space for queer people, apparently.
And then there was the catalog. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, so I don't want to put too much pressure on this, but you are at that 29, turning 30, age. Mm-hmm. You've been dating your girlfriend for a year and a half. Tell me about the future. What do you see for yourself in your relationship, in your life?
Oh, yeah. So I am so happy in my relationship right now. I feel very lucky and blessed that I've found someone who, is just the perfect complement to me. And like I was saying at the beginning of like doing these episodes and all these interviews with couples from all over the country and from all different ages, like, has just been so fun to see kind of like how does my relationship fit into like some of these lessons that they're talking about, or the way that they've met and connected? And so, yeah, I think future plans, you know, we do talk a lot about marriage, and getting married these days is so expensive. You kind of took the smart way out, Jerry, by just going down to the courthouse.
We did. And you know what's funny is I didn't even think about it at the time, but that's how my parents did it too. So even though I wasn't aping their example, they actually did the justice of the peace when they got married in the 70s.
Oh.
So in a way, it's very similar. But at the same time, you know, I think I want to just touch on something that we haven't yet, which is that it's also okay to be single, or to not be in a couple situation, or to be in a poly situation.
Yes.
I mean, do you ever feel that pressure? Like people are like, oh, why does it have to always be about relationships?
I have thought about that, and I've actually thought about maybe expanding the definition a little bit of like what we're trying to do at How We Met, just because I would like to include people who are like love themselves, like self-love. Like it'd be cool to do an episode where someone's just like very happy, perfect example of how to like live your best life being single, or, you know, having connections with people in other ways beyond just like a very monogamous romantic relationship. So, because I agree, I think that there is no one right way to do it. And I think the most important thing is like, do you have love in your life? And are you giving love to other people? So that's, I think, important. And yeah, and relationships come in all shapes and forms nowadays, and polycules, like maybe we'll do a polycule episode. That would be interesting. That would be, depending on how many people are involved in the polycule, it could be a lot of voices, but
I mean, totally. I'm always curious how they meet and how they met. I mean, I've been watching Hacks. I don't know if you watched that show.
Oh my God, yes. I'm not caught up, but I love Hacks.
I won't spoil it for you, but there is a threesome poly subplot in this season, and so it's been interesting to see how they met.
That's awesome.
And also, you know, I've been really moved by some of the stories that I've been able to share, which are people who've dealt with grief and who've lost a long-term partner, and that's been really powerful to hear about. So anyway, I mean, I think I'm excited for your season 2. Do you have any plans, like when you want to do it, or if people want to reach out and to be a part of it, how do they contact you?
Oh, yes. Please reach out if you have a story that you really want to share on the podcast. The email, you can message the show on Instagram at How We Met Pod. If you're not on Instagram, I don't blame you. You can email the show at howwemetcast, CAST, at gmail.com. And that would be the best way to get in touch. In terms of plans for season 2, I hope to be back this fall with more episodes. I wanted to take a little time off, just kind of reevaluate, see, you know, if there are any learning lessons to be had for future seasons, and then maybe get some recorded this summer and then push them out in the fall. So we'll see if I can stick to that, because I do this on the side of my full-time job. So it kind of is all depending on that.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. The side hustle that you have to have the full-time gig to be able to support the thing is what I'm doing as well. So I totally hear you. Well, I am so happy that you were able to join me for the Queer Love podcast. And I was also so happy to be on the How We Met podcast. And if anyone is listening to this who's not already a subscriber to the Queer Love Project, you can find us at queerloveproject.substack.com. Otherwise, thank you so much, Xandra, for joining me today.
Oh, Jerry, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing with the Queer Love Project. I was so excited when we first got connected, because I just think the world needs more projects like ours. And it's so awesome to see what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.